It's not just a choice. It's a complicated mental health condition that is much more common than we might be aware of here in our society. Here are some of the do's and don'ts. Here are the recommended communication strategies. What happens if your loved one does get a bit defensive? How do you take space? Or how do you continue with the conversation? If you are physically getting to the point where you're helping them with their stuff, here are the ways that you can go about doing that. And sometimes in my work, I've met in the home with my client and their loved one, providing some of those techniques in real time.
Welcome to the Healing Blueprint. I'm your host, Jill Briansky. On this podcast, I speak with experts from traditional and holistic healing modalities. And together, we share insights, tools, and practical guidance so you can create your own healing blueprint. Let's move into today's episode and get started. Behind every pile, every box, and every item kept, there's often a story waiting to be understood. In today's episode, we dive into the psychology of hoarding and the compassionate journey from overwhelm to healing. Joining us today for this conversation is Eileen Dacey. Eileen, welcome to the show.
Hi, Jill. It's great to be here.
So can you just give people an understanding of what hoarding actually is?
Sure. That's a great question. Hoarding disorder, or how it's formally referred to as, is a mental health disorder that has public health conditions or implications. The way that hoarding disorder is defined is that someone sort of struggles with a persistent difficulty in parting with or letting go of possessions, regardless of their actual value. And this is oftentimes due to a strong urge to hold on to the item. So in layman's terms, I usually refer to that as a strong level of attachment to a great number of possessions. But it's not always someone struggling to let go of things. Sometimes folks might struggle with making decisions about letting go of things too. So someone can indicate, hey, I would be okay with parting with this item, but I'm not quite sure how. And so that part is quite complicated, sort of speaks to some of the executive functioning issues that are associated with hoarding disorder that isn't often talked about. I think that the other components of hoarding disorder might be the most visible component, what you and I might be very familiar with, which is a large volume of items gets to the point where it congests and clutter active living areas of the home, compromising its intended use. Usually when I say that, what I mean by active living areas of the home could be a living room, could be a bedroom, a bathroom, pathway. It could spill out into the front yard, the backyard, a car or two, a storage unit or 7. So what that speaks to is that if someone has the space and they're currently not in treatment for their behavior, is oftentimes they're going to fill up those spaces with possessions that they've had for a long period of time, or possessions that they're continuing to accumulate and acquire and bring into their home as well.
So if I understand this, what we see on TV is these gigantic piles of things in people's homes. And what you're explaining, I'm hearing both. That it's piles, that it's getting in the way, and that it may be gigantic. Like, who's to determine what the threshold is between someone who just has things and likes things and someone who has a disorder?
That's also a great question, Jill. I mean, let's face it, we do live in a highly consumeristic society, and therefore we all have possessions and we have reasons for holding on to those possessions, whether we see utility and value in that item, or we have an emotional attachment with this item, or it's just simply beautiful and aesthetically pleasing. I think that with hoarding disorder, that is often overlooked is where is that line drawn in the sand between what is considered normative behavior, I have possessions and reasons for holding on to those possessions, to then what's considered excessive, which is what I hear within your question. And that excessive piece really speaks to not just the attachment to possessions that someone has, but where the amount of possessions within the home makes it difficult to live and function and makes it difficult for people to be able to enjoy things that are important to them. So part of my work with this disorder and working with my clients for the number of years that I've been doing this is that I've focused much more on how do I bring you to a place where you're able to live life again and enjoy the things that are meaningful to you. My focus isn't so much on how many items you have. I'm just thinking about functioning and quality of life and how can we work together in order to reclaim your life.
And how would someone do that? How does someone go from having all sorts of things around them to maybe even slowly releasing those things and moving forward in more of a maybe community or connected way?
It's a multi-tiered process for sure. And in order to think about the releasing of items and getting to a point where someone is able to enjoy life and function is, of course, we have to consider the implementation of a true valid treatment modality in working with this disorder. So what's considered sort of the gold standard for treatment would be cognitive behavioral therapy that's specific to hoarding disorder. What I like to say that I bring to the process of working with a client is a little bit more than that. I try to approach all of my cases through a real emphasis on just curiosity and having someone be able to share their story with me and me being respectful of their shared stories and lived experiences, getting to know what are their true values as well, and co-constructing goals together rather than me saying, hey, I would like for you to do X, Y, and Z in order for us to see a reduction in the clutter of the home. It's more so on, well, if your home was just the way you wanted it to be, how would your life be different? Not how would your home be different, but how would your life be different? So I would say that it's really trying to get that buy-in of trust and rapport from my client and building from there of us working together towards their values, if you will.
I love the fact that you are really humanizing people and using their story to support what they want. I heard you also say that you see a reduction in the symptoms. Do the symptoms ever go away? Does somebody ever recover from a hoarding disorder?
Another great question. Hoarding disorder, I also want to provide this clarification because not everyone knows this. It's a disorder that falls under what is known as the OCD-related disorder spectrum. So although it's its own distinct diagnosis, there's a lot of similarity and overlap between obsessive compulsive disorder, for example. So with that said, hoarding disorder is considered both a chronic and progressive disorder. So meaning that someone's going to struggle with their behaviors over the course of their lives. And what we see as scholars and practitioners is that the behavior worsens with each decade of one's life if they're not actively in treatment. And so many folks aren't aware that behaviors typically begin to emerge in late adolescence. And again, because it's chronic and progressive, we do see the worsening of the behavior over the course of someone's life. I, as a clinician, oftentimes see when someone is electing to come to treatment on their own, they're not being forced into it, is that the average age of a treatment seeker is roughly 55 years of age or older. Can someone sort of recover, if you will? I would say that it's a complicated answer, but that someone can live a life where they're maintaining their gains and maintaining the things that they've worked on with their clinician or practitioner over a period of time, but it takes work. Will we see someone get to the point after they've concluded treatment where they're no longer struggling with clutter or struggling with acquiring items? No, but they will have enough of a skill set, if you will, that they can reflect a little bit more intentionally on, do I need this item? Should I let go of it? Prior to purchasing or bringing something to the house is thinking about some of those reflective questions in a much more detailed and thoughtful way. But it does take work, but that maintenance is what we strive for in treatment. And it's certainly possible. I've seen it many times for a great majority of folks that I've worked with over the course of my career.
So if this starts in adolescence, and given today's society, people often get shamed for this type of behavior and ridiculed and made fun of and all those things. Now, at 55, you have decades of that shame building on top of things, and to the point where you're probably shaming yourself and judging yourself and most likely not talking very kindly to yourself. Does that play a part in their treatment?
Yes, the shame and stigma plays a huge role in building momentum, getting started, maintaining progress. Is that progress is sort of evaluated when we're working with this condition in a nonlinear fashion. I oftentimes will see someone struggle with getting started, maybe minimizing or denying if a problem exists. Sometimes that happens. Or someone's enthusiastic about getting started. They've found someone, we've begun the work together, but then a lot of that negative self-talk starts to come up. I've been struggling with this for so long. I don't think I'll ever be able to get a handle on this. Or some of those societal negative implications that are perpetuated, whether that's in the media, different news articles, different books related to hoarding and cluttering. And so some of those labels, such as lazy, loser, mess, really sticks with the person. And one of the things that I try in my work to sort of deconstruct is that construct of hoarder. The term hoarder really does have a lot of negative implications, not only for how, as a society, we understand this as a true mental health condition. It sort of insinuates that this is a choice when it really isn't that simple. But then there's that trickle down effect down to the person who's actually struggling with the condition of, I am a hoarder. And I've seen over time how that can really halt progress for someone, or how they internalize their progress. That comes up quite often. I haven't done enough, even though I'm there, really kind of cheering my clients on, saying, but look at what you've done. Look at what we've done together. This is amazing. As they'll see that being able to believe that progress is actually happening can be quite complicated. So I try to go about it in a lot of other creative ways to really sort of indicate and push that there is true evidence that progress is actually happening, and we're able to measure that progress together. But certainly, back to your question, is that stigma is hard for people, and it's hard to shake for sure.
Yeah. I am going to take you in a different direction here for a second. And OCD, in my personal opinion, is usually brought on by some sort of trauma. Big trauma, little trauma, just some sort of trauma forces someone to go into a space of, I need to control everything. And if hoarding is a type of control, is there, or have you found or noticed a connection between trauma and hoarding?
Most certainly. I would say over 99% of all of the clients I've worked with over the course of my career have presented with a history of complex trauma. This is also reflected in the literature as well. So to what extent or what percentage of people who have hoarding disorder also have a history of trauma, that's unknown presently. But what a lot of folks who specialize in this area can all collectively agree on is that, yes, there is trauma, and trauma looks, and feels different depending on the person. But what we notice with hoarding disorder, someone can present with a history of psychological trauma, emotional trauma, physical abuse in the past, sexual abuse, stressful life events, perceived loss. There is a higher correlation of those who struggle with hoarding animals, which is a subcomponent of hoarding disorder, is that these individuals have higher rates of a history of sexual abuse in their previous, over the course of their lifetime as well. And so how does that then show up with possessions, for example? Is that need to hold on to something as a way of self-soothing, if you will. Acquiring items oftentimes functions as a way of coping with different triggers for somebody. And so if a person who's trying to help someone with this condition, if they fail to recognize the role of trauma and what that looks like in terms of someone holding on to something or acquiring something, I think that they might be doing a disservice in truly trying to help the person. And this is why it's so important just trying to get to know the person that you're working with a great deal, because then I'm able to understand a little bit more of their history and what makes this behavior so hard for them specifically.
We're doing a lot of talk about physical possessions and how those can be comforting. And I know animals for a lot of people have a very comforting effect. Therapy dogs, for example, have become kind of a really big thing lately. And do people bring in animals in addition or instead of possessions in order to create more of a loving environment for themselves? Is that part of this disorder in any way?
Yes. So to clarify, just for folks that are listening who might not be familiar with this, is with hoarding disorder, oftentimes we do function or focus on possessions. Of people who struggle with hoarding possessions and keeping possessions, not all of them will also concurrently struggle with hoarding animals. But when we see those who actually do struggle with hoarding animals, is that they oftentimes will concurrently struggle with the environment too and holding on to possessions. So we do see that. And why try to bring in animals is that we do see true connections between that unconditional love that we feel from our animals. I'm a pet owner myself. I know that many people are. Think about what your pets mean to you, the value they bring in your life. I know my pets bring a lot of value in mine. Is that, of course, we see that in folks that struggle with this condition too. I think earlier when I was talking about where's that line drawn in the sand between normative pet ownership all the way to then thinking about what's sort of considered excessive, is that there's still a lot of stigma associated with this too. Oftentimes the behavior just simply begins as, I've noticed that there's a feral cat outside. I want to bring the cat in, provide it with shelter, food, nutrition, and take care of that cat. But over time, as someone's circumstances changes, whether they're just aging or financially have come across some hardship, is that being able to take care of those number of animals has gotten more complicated for them too. So it doesn't ordinarily start off as bad intent. It's just over time, it starts to get a little bit too difficult for the person to be able to maintain that. The care of the animals that exist within the home struggles with trying to continue to bring in more animals, even though there are those evident problems within the home, as well as maintaining the environment. So that's also another multifaceted and very complicated issue as well.
You just gave a great example of how somebody would get started hoarding. Are there warning signs or things that people can look out for if their child or their teenager starts hoarding physical possessions or animals? Or is there anything people can, say, oh, wait a minute, this is something maybe we need to look deeper into, or at least have a light bulb go off?
Yeah, I would say that unfortunately, this is an area that needs continued attention and research as well. The majority of published literature that we have on hoarding disorder entails adult participants rather than younger folks. Early intervention is quite complicated, and it's complicated for a number of reasons. Two complicating factors I usually like to talk about is, on one hand, when we think of an adolescent living at home, is ordinarily they are also living with someone who might be imposing strict rules as to how they should keep up with their space, a caretaker or guardian, who might also be cleaning up after them, throwing things away without their consent or assent, etc. But then the second complicating factor is the diagnosis itself, is that in order to assign this diagnosis of hoarding disorder is that the environment has to have a large volume of possessions. So oftentimes clinicians aren't quite looking out for this with our younger folks. The warning signs or things to pay attention to for caretakers, going back to your question, is thinking about more so the attachments that they have to a great number of possessions, even possessions that might not look like it's of value to you. So some stories that I've read about or even heard about in my practice is where someone might hold inanimate objects that don't look like they have a lot of value or meaning, whether it's rocks or sticks or something of that nature. As a parent, if you're able to engage in thoughtful and empathetic conversations with your kids, that's highly recommended. If they're noticing that it's starting to get quite complicated and that there might be a problem there, is being able to then connect with a therapist, ideally a therapist who specializes in the treatment of hoarding disorder, would be highly advisable. But they're going to need that caretaker's collateral information to really build a full picture of what might be going on.
It seems like a really specialized area for a therapist to work in. Are there therapists accessible in all locations? Do people work in person or is it usually online? Like, how does the therapy aspect work with
It is certainly a specialized area of practice, and we're seeing growing number of resources throughout our country. I argue that there are not enough, and we can certainly do better. But we do see that it is a growing field of practice. So if you're searching for or thinking about who could help me with this, is trying to find someone who specializes. And there are a number of sites. So say, for example, the IOCDF.org. So that's the International OCD Foundation website, usually keeps an up-to-date resource directory. You could try Psychology Today and filter it so that you're looking for hoarding disorder. And there's a number of other sites. But depending on where you live, that still can be challenging. And so if you cannot locate someone who specializes in this disorder specifically, you can then potentially look for someone who focuses in the treatment of OCD-related disorders. And if not, I would then recommend at least a CBT therapist, because many of those skills are transferable in the treatment of hoarding disorder. If you are really focusing on possessions in and of itself, I know a lot of people will look for a professional organizer or someone of that nature. I would also encourage that if you are connecting with one of those professionals, to ask them if they've had any previous training, experience, or exposure in working with hoarding behavior. Many professional organizers go above and beyond and attend those types of trainings. So I would say that if you are able to try and look for some of those folks, and if not, that here are some of my other recommended courses of action.
And if you have a family member or a friend that you suspect has some sort of hoarding behavior happening, how do you encourage people to talk to their family?
Another great question. I would encourage that if you are concerned about your loved one, your friend, etc., is to come from a place of love and be able to express that concern in a thoughtful way. So some of the things that I hear that's going to produce a defensive response, if you're using you language, you should stop doing X, is of course the person isn't going to be all that open and receptive to that type of conversation. But if you were to frame it more so using I statements and being able to express that concern, and maybe talk about the ways in which you're there to support them, such as, I love you, you mean a lot to me, I am noticing or I'm concerned about X, and I'm wondering if we could work on this together. Here are the ways in which I could help if you're interested. What do you need from me? And trying to think about how do we go about this in a collaborative way. And so there are some bodies of literature, especially some books that are out there that are geared towards helping loved ones and family members of those who hoard have more productive and empathetic and efficient conversations with the person that they love. And trying to remind yourself of why you're concerned and being able to express that in the most loving and empathetic way is going to increase more of that chance that the person's going to hear your concerns and want to allow you in. If you come into it as, I want to take control and I'm going to tell you what you should keep, I'm going to throw things away on your behalf, even though maybe the intention is good, it's not going to be that helpful. And unfortunately, you're going to produce adverse effects as a result.
Yeah, because you're reinforcing what created it in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hearing a lot of therapy language, which you're a therapist, that makes sense. But I know when I try to impart some of that therapy language on my clients, it takes a while for them to understand what an I statement is and how to use it and how not to get upset when their loved one responds in a different way. Do you ever work with the loved ones to frame things in a different way so that they have a better understanding of how to have these conversations?
Most certainly, I have. In the past, I've facilitated support groups that are more focused on loved ones of those who hoard, and I've also done one-on-one work with family members as well. So being able to go through just the sort of knowledge and background of what is hoarding disorder, right? It's not just a choice. It's a complicated mental health condition that is much more common than we might be aware of here in our society. Here are some of the do's and don'ts. Here are the recommended communication strategies. What happens if your loved one does get a bit defensive? How do you take space, or how do you continue with the conversation? If you are physically getting to the point where you're helping them with their stuff, here are the ways that you can go about doing that. And sometimes in my work, I've met in the home with my client and their loved one, providing some of those techniques in real time so that they can help their loved one in a great way and work towards those goals and not do something that might be counterproductive as well.
Great. Thank you so much for giving a voice to hoarding, because it is, I think, as you said, often very misunderstood and very stigmatizing. If someone wanted to get in touch with you, how would they do that?
Yes, certainly. That's you can a great way to get in touch with me. I do a lot of work with one of my colleagues. Her name is Marnie Matthews. So a great way of getting in touch with me is by looking at our website, which is the Center for Hoarding and Cluttering, where we're able to provide some of that consultative feedback, trainings, or even connecting you with someone who might be local to you would be a great way of doing so, or connecting with me directly via my email as well, which is Eileen at New England OCD.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate you being here today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm happy to talk about this. It's important that we don't forget that we are people, and even if someone struggles with this diagnosis, they're still a loved one to someone. And I have loved this work so much, and I'm going to continue to advocate that we take humanistic approaches when working with this complex issue.
That's a wrap for this episode. Honor what landed, release what didn't, and we'll see you next time on The Healing Blueprint.